Well, you'd be happy to know we will be leaving, at least in my Bible, the first page of Mark today. So that's good. We're plugging line along. So with that being said, let's look at Mark 1, 32 through 39. Mark chapter 1, verses 32 through 39. Flip those pages, scroll those phones. Mark 1, 32 through 39. It reads this way: When the evening came, after the sun had set, they brought to him all those who were sick and demon-possessed. The whole town, here we go, turning that page, the whole town was assembled at the door. And he healed many who were sick with various diseases, and drove out many demons, that he would not permit the demons to speak, because they knew him. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he got up, went out, and made his way to a deserted place, and there he was praying. Simon and his companions searched for him, and when they found him, they said, "Everyone is looking for you." And he said to them, "Let's go on to the neighboring villages, so that I may preach there too. This is why I have come." Let's pray together. We are grateful for today. We are grateful for the opportunity to worship as a church family. We ask that your Spirit guide us along, and let us take to heart the scripture that was read and now is about to be preached. Christ, be pleased, be adored, and may your name be pronounced, shine here at First Baptist Church. We want to see our community saved. We want to see disciples made. We want to see you worshiped. In Christ's holy name do we say these things. Amen. I believe in the past I have shared with you that one of my heroes is my former oncologist back in North Carolina. Her name is Dr. Fran Colicchio, and I loved her. I worked with her for many years. She worked hard on me, and God really used her, I'll say it, to save my life. She really did a lot of good things for me, and here I am before you today. Now, the thing is about Dr. Colicchio, and I think a lot of people in the medical profession can attest to this, she always looked really tired. She always looked wore out. That she would come in, she was always pleasant, she was always kind, but she had a lot of bags under her eyes. Her hair would just be pulled back in a quick ponytail, or she'd just allow it to drop. And she would always be pleasant and talk to me and see how I was doing. And after she would leave, Janie and I would always talk and say, she strikes me as one of those scientists who just spends all their day in the lab working really hard to make some great advancement in medical science. And I really think that is the case, because you can look her up and she's known for many wonderful things, but she always looked tired. She was always in a hurry, and she always had a lot of patients to see, and sometimes they would call her while she was even meeting with me. So there's a lot of energy that goes into ministering to people, healing people, and loving on people. Now this morning we're looking at an account in which Jesus begins his ministry of healing, that he's about to go around helping out a lot of people. And so it's about to skyrocket his ministry. Things are going to get even more challenging and busy for him. And so what we see in this text is he takes steps to guarantee his perseverance. Now in Luke 8:46, let me read this for you. Jesus said, "Someone did touch me. I know that power has gone out from me." Now in context, that is the woman who had a bleeding issue, who went through the crowd saying to herself, if only if I touched the hem of his garment, then I would be healed. And so someone did that. She reached out, touched Jesus, and she was healed. And Jesus, even though he was not actively doing anything, sensed that power had left his being. And so what that seems to suggest is that Jesus, to do these activities, cost him power. It cost him energy. We got to remember this. Although we believe that Jesus is God, he was also, and is till to this day, but in his earthly ministry, he was God in the flesh, meaning that he took upon himself human frailty and weaknesses. And so when we see Jesus going around, traveling, spending all day doing these activities, these wear him out. Power leaves him, and at the end of the day, he needs sleep, he needs rest. And like I said, when we look at this text, we're going to see what he does in order to persevere so he can continue his ministry, no matter if it's a healing ministry, preaching ministry, or whatever it may be. And so when we look at what he does, what we can do is do the same thing. Because here's the thing, ministry can be hard, that there's a lot to it. VBS is coming up. Janie and the volunteers, those who are helping out, it's tough, it's tiring. Working with the youth is tiring. Doing a music program where I am the bass player, that wears someone out. That is troubling and hard. And so these things are not easy, and sometimes people go to church, take all these things for granted. The lights are on, doors are unlocked, the AC's going, there's someone watching kids in the midst, and we sit there and not really appreciate all the hard work that goes into just seeing a Sunday morning go. And it's not just me, but there's a plethora of people who are involved in that. And so this is probably, of all the sermons I ever preached, one of the more practical, pragmatic sermons. It's a how-to sermon, and basically, it's how to persevere in ministry. Some of this can be even applicable to other things in your life, not just in ministry. But here are the three things that we need to keep in mind, the three things that we see Jesus doing when he begins his healing ministry. Number one, prayer. Obvious, right? We say that's obvious, and we say that's a given, but we kind of struggle in that department, don't we? That sometimes is the last thing when we do, when we are in ministry. You would think that someone like me, being a pastor, wouldn't struggle with this at all. But it is. It's hard to find time to get away and pray, and also to pray right, and also to pray in such a way that gives you refreshment. So we're going to talk about that. Secondly, we're going to talk about focus. Focus. Because things get pretty busy in the church. Ministry gets busy. Life gets busy. And throughout all of that, you got to make sure that you are focusing on the right things, that you're not distracted, that you're not bogging down your calendar or anything like that, but you're genuinely focusing on what truly matters, which is our final point, mission. What is our mission? What is all ministry supposed to be about? It's not just activity for activity's sake, is it? It's not just to draw a crowd, is it? And that's usually the gauge by which we measure ministry, because anytime someone meets me and I introduce myself as a pastor, you know what they always ask me first and foremost? How many are at your church? Always. Always. Anytime a ministry is conducted, when people want to know how it went, you know what they always ask? How many showed up? And so we have to ask ourselves, are we judging ourselves by the right standard? Are we gauging ministry with the correct criteria? What is the ministry? What is the mission that we're supposed to be focusing on to determine if we are on the right path? And so it certainly involves other people, loving on people, and being out there and being involved in people's lives, being committed to the mission. John Stott, he put it this way, and this really convicted me. He says, the church tends to become very preoccupied with its own affairs. You think that's true? That churches tend to exist only for themselves, to cater to its own members? Obsessed with petty? No. Pettiness inside the local church can't be true. Parochial trivia, while the needy world outside is waiting. So the Son sends us out into the world as the Father had sent him into the world. And so we are a church that's supposed to be about a mission. We have a ministry. We need to make sure that we're a church of prayer, a church of focus, because as we're about to see, things are about to get very busy for Jesus. In fact, most commentators, when they divide up the ministry of Jesus, they would refer this to the popular years. These are the years in which Jesus is well respected, well liked. He's not getting a lot of pushback yet. He's very busy, and the people love him. So right now, I want to look at verses 32 through 34 one more time, and we're going to set the scene as to what I am talking about, okay? It said, when evening came, after the sun had set, they brought to him all those who were sick and demon-possessed. The whole town was assembled at the door, and he healed many who were sick with various diseases, and drove out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. So like I said, I want to set the scene here. The word was out. Even though some of the things that Jesus, some of the miracles he had performed were in like private locations inside a synagogue or inside someone's house, well, his reputation is now getting out into the population that he is known as an exorcist and he is a healer. And so the whole town of Capernaum, remember, this is all in the course of one day, by the way. He's already healed a demoniac and he healed Peter's mother-in-law. This is still the same day, except now the sun is going down. And so everyone is gathering outside of presumably Peter's house. Just the whole town of Capernaum. And I know we like to picture these ancient villages of having like maybe 24 people living in it. Hundreds of people would have lived in Capernaum, if not even thousands of people. And so the whole area is coming and surrounding Peter's household. And the Sabbath was over, okay? So that means they were seeking to be healed. We talked about this last week, that when Jesus healed on the Sabbath, it was okay. He wasn't broken any laws or anything like that. But had he continued, yeah, it would have been very challenging for people to see him healing on the Sabbath and receiving him. But the way that Jews understood the day is that the day was over when? Sundown. Sundown. Not us. We sit there and say the day is technically over at midnight. But as soon as the sun sets, the next day begins. And so now Sabbath is over. Everybody with their diseases, everybody with their demon-possessed loved ones, all these individuals are saying to themselves, the Sabbath is over, so we can go to this miracle worker, and now he can freely heal us without any fear of violating the Sabbath. So everybody has come, a new day has begun, and here they are. So the townspeople were talking about Jesus. But not only were the townspeople, but demons were even talking about Jesus. He drove out the demons, and he would not allow them to speak openly about him. Why? Why doesn't he want demons talking about him? Well, several reasons come to mind. Number one, Jesus was operating on his own timeline, and he did not want the demonic to rush things. Jesus often did that, didn't he? That he told people to be quiet, don't go tell anyone that you were healed. And the reason being is he didn't want to rush things. And there were other occasions where someone didn't listen and they went and told everybody. Then Jesus got tied down with busyness. That crowds came to him and he's like, great, now I'm swarmed and it's going to be harder. He certainly did not want his timeline compromised. Jesus was also keeping the enemy in the dark. We see that in 1 Corinthians 2, as it talks about the rulers of this age. Had they known who Jesus was, they would not have crucified him. Now, the rulers of this age is in reference to the demonic. That had they known what the crucifixion would involve, that is his resurrection, they wouldn't have done it. And so Jesus is purposely keeping them in the dark. But I think the main thing is this. I think Jesus is offended by demonic confession. I do. I think when they come along and say, Jesus, Son of the Most High God, when they say, I know who you are the Messiah, I think it bothers him. I think he doesn't want to be associated with that filth. And so in a similar way, Jesus doesn't want to be tied to any evil movement of our day. Jesus doesn't want to be tied to any false religion of our day as well. And so we see that in our culture. Everybody wants to boast Jesus. Have you ever noticed that? That Jesus is on everybody's side. It doesn't matter that all the sides contradict one each other. And so they say, no, Jesus is on our side, and therefore we have Jesus contradicting himself. Everybody wants Jesus on their side. But here's the thing. Jesus is the truth, and therefore he's only on the side of his Father. And he doesn't want his name attached to the demonic. And here's the thing. It gets in the way later on, right? Because when he starts healing people and casting out demons, his enemies say he's doing it by the power of whom? Satan. See? He did not want his name associated with Satan. And so he's trying to avoid it. But all this to say is that Jesus' popularity had escalated, and now his ministry demands had increased. He is starting his healing ministry, his miraculous ministry, his casting out demons ministry, and now whole swarms of people want his attention. Sun up, the sun down, he is out there healing, ministering, and loving on people. How in the world could someone persevere under circumstances like that? Well, obviously the answer to that is found in verse 35, prayer. It says, very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he got up, went out, and made his way to a deserted place, and there he was praying. So the main point is this: one perseveres in ministry by prayer. One perseveres in ministry by prayer. By the way, not just ministry, but one perseveres in their marriage. One perseveres in their job. One perseveres in their parenting, school, whatever avenue of life that we're talking about. You must always be an individual who is dedicated to the discipline of prayer. So again, one perseveres in ministry by prayer. Jesus does the unexpected. Usually, one does not avoid the public eye after achieving popularity. And we see that a lot of times with preacher boys, that they love their YouTube, they love their social media, they love to make sure that everybody knows what they're up to. They like to see their names on memes, they love to see their names on flyers, bulletins, and everything out there. They love to have ministries named after themselves. But Jesus does the complete opposite, doesn't he? He doesn't do anything to draw attention to himself. In fact, it's the popularity that drives him to go away. It has the opposite impact on him, in that he retreats in prayer. While everyone is sleeping, he disappears. He does not want to be found. And the Gospel of Mark speaks of him doing this at least on two other occasions, in Mark 6, Mark 14, and the other Gospels make it clear this was part of his routine. This was part of his habit, was to go away and not be found so that he can have some quiet time with the Lord. So it was his habit to be alone with God. If Jesus were to persevere in his exhausting ministry, he must be a man of prayer. You know, it's funny, and I always get offended by this, even though I think when people use this terminology, they don't mean any harm by it, but it's very thoughtless. Have you ever noticed that a lot of times people say things like, well, the least that we can do now is prayer. You know, all we can do now is prayer. There is nothing more to do but prayer. And that phrase, those phrases tend to trivialize the power of prayer. It's almost like all we can do now is give up. Is basically what people seem to be implying by it. That prayer is this last resort thing. That if you stop doing anything and start praying, that you're not doing anything anymore. Prayer is not an inactivity. A lot of people think that prayer is a work. Prayer is a ministry. It's something that you can do. And so when people out there saying we're giving you our thoughts in prayer, that's not inactivity. That's not nothing. That is something. And so we got to avoid this mentality that prayer is this last-ditch effort when all of our human efforts have failed. It should be at the forefront of everything we do. We don't sit there and say, well, our ministry is failing. Now is the time to pray. No, before you go into battle, you have prayer. Before everything else, you're supposed to be people of prayer, routinely praying. Again, prayer is not like admitting that you've run out of options. Prayer is not admitting that you failed. Prayer is not resorting to inactivity. It is an activity in of itself, and it's a very powerful activity. And so let's not trivialize it. Let's not minimize it. And so prayer is not a break from ministry. And a lot of people, I hate that too. People sit there and say, well, in ministry, you got to take a break so you can have prayer. Prayer is ministry. When you're taking a break from ministry, it's not because you're praying. That is part of your ministry. The disciples said as much, right? When in Acts chapter 6, when the early church were concerned about certain widows being neglected in the food distribution, they said to themselves, we got to take this issue to the apostles. What was the apostles' response? We can't busy ourselves with this, but rather we got to commit ourselves to prayer and preaching. Prayer and preaching. And there's nothing in the text to suggest that they were kind of snubbing their nose at the work or that their prayer wasn't work. It wasn't them saying, we're not going to go work, we're going to go pray. It's them saying, we're going to go do the work of prayer. And you're sitting there thinking to yourselves, how can you consider prayer a work? Well, then why do you struggle doing it? If it's that easy, why do you struggle with it? Why do you struggle with coming to prayer meetings, prayer walks? Why do you struggle with that? If it's not a work, if it's not a challenge, Jesus never would have continued his ministry apart from prayer. Ever. Neither can we. Let's talk about focus as well. Verses 36 through 37. It says this, Simon and his companions, presumably the initial apostles, right? Simon and his companions searched for him, and when they found him, they said, everyone is looking for you. Let's stop right there. The main point is this, one perseveres in ministry by focusing on what matters. Simon did not like Jesus' disappearance. He did not like it at all. After all, Jesus' ministry is just beginning. He's just now getting popular. Now is the time to strike while the iron is hot. He needs to increase his fame. It makes me wonder if selfish ambition is the reason for Peter's drive to find Jesus. After all, the whole town was gathering at his house, right? And so Jesus' popularity could be his popularity. He could easily ride the coattails of Jesus and boost his own name. And so it says, Simon and others searched for Jesus. Now, a few commentators, when we look at the Greek, suggest that their motives for doing so were not pure. And so if you're under the impression that they were just curious as to where Jesus went, what he was up to, the Greek suggests that they had ulterior motives as to why they were looking for Jesus. In fact, it can be literally rendered to hunt someone down and can mean, and I quote, to seek with evil or inappropriate intention. In other words, Jesus disappeared. They did not like that he disappeared. And in their anger, in their annoyance, they decided to go hunt and search him down because how could he take a break during this time? How could he disappear without letting anybody know that he is going to pray? So this seems to be the case because when they found Jesus, they implied he is not where he is supposed to be. Everyone is looking for you. You need to be working. You need to be promoting yourself. But Jesus was not going to get distracted. To persevere, Jesus was to maintain his focus. Not only is he supposed to maintain his focus on prayer, but as we'll talk about in a little bit, but he has to focus on the mission. And he's not going to let anybody else tell him what that mission is. It reminds me of the book of Nehemiah. Are we familiar with what the book of Nehemiah is about? The Israelis are coming back from captivity, and there were certain individuals who were given responsibilities to rebuild the city of Jerusalem, to rebuild the walls. The city and walls were devastated, and so Nehemiah and other leaders took it upon themselves underneath the guidance of the Lord to go back to their land so that they can rebuild the walls, rebuild the cities. Now here's the thing. If you follow the will of the Lord and you are in the building business, that is ministry, you will always, always merit the eyes of those naysayers. There will always be enemies who are in opposition to the Lord's work. And so there was those on the outside observing that Jerusalem and its walls are being rebuilt, and they became a thorn in the flesh of those who were trying to do the Lord's work. But one thing that they constantly did was that they would send a messenger to Nehemiah and say, come over here, have dinner with us. Let's talk about what you're doing. We want to be a part of this too. Or sometimes they were very aggressive, saying, we're going to make sure that you can't do this. And so routinely they would sit there and say, we invite you to have a place at the table because we're the big boys. We're the ones that you really need to please. But listen what Nehemiah said. In Nehemiah 6, 3 through 4, it says, so I sent messengers to them saying, I am doing important work and cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and go down to you? 4 times they sent me the same proposal, and I gave them the same reply. In other words, Nehemiah knew where he was supposed to focus. He wasn't worried about rubbing elbows with the elite. He wasn't worried about placating to all the naysayers. He was only focused on one thing, and that is the mission that the Lord had given him. And for Nehemiah, that mission was to go and to rebuild, and nothing was going to pull him away from it. Same with Jesus. Jesus had a mission, and there was nothing that was going to pull him away from it. Peter was not able to come to Jesus and say, you know, you're disappointing your crowd. Your fans don't like you anymore. You're going to lose followers if you keep operating this way. Don't you know that you're just at the beginning of your career? You don't have time to pray. This is what you need to be doing. So Peter wanted to be a master of Jesus' calendar. Peter wanted to be a master of Jesus' timeline. But Jesus said, it's not going to go down that way. It's not going to go down that way. See, the thing is that our focus is not about being rude. It is a tool to prioritize. It is a tool to prioritize. And this is a fear I have for many local churches, that we have X amount of things going on. There's something happening every night that needs X amount of volunteers, X amount of money. We want to exhaust you. We want to wear ourselves out. And we just have to ask ourselves, is this really focused on the mission? Or is this just about filling up a calendar? That if we see an empty date, are we able to resist the temptation to fill it? No. No, see, churches love busyness. Because again, and I've said this before, we trick ourselves into thinking that busyness equals holiness. We're doing well. How do you know? Because of all the activities we got going on. How are those good? Are they good? Yeah, because we got X amount of people who show up to them. That's the standard that we use. And so we wear ourselves out. Then we're not praying as a church. We're not praying as a church. We're losing our focus. We're sitting there saying, this is a cool idea. I saw this happening over here. I think this is neat. This is great. Build up our little private projects, our private kingdoms, wear ourselves out, and we're not really focused on what it's really all about. No? Yes? Stepping on too many toes? So what are we supposed to be focused on? If it's not just pure activity, if it's not because someone told us we're supposed to, even someone, listen, here's the thing too. No doubt Peter was a loving guy and loved Jesus. Peter's not just an absolute enemy here. He just is not on the same page as Jesus. You know why? Because he doesn't know the mission. But Jesus is about to tell him in verse 38, here's the mission. And he said to them, no, he doesn't reprimand them, chew them out or anything. He said, let's go on to the neighboring villages so that I may preach there too. This is why I have come. There's the mission. This is why I'm in the world. This is what it's all about. And so one perseveres in ministry when they have a clear understanding of the mission. Do you think that the average member here at First Baptist Church knows what the mission is? What our goal is as a church? Well, it's just to meet every week, right? And to fill the slots and to do things, right? What is the mission? What is our mission? After spending time healing people and exorcising demons, Jesus took the time to pray and to focus. He is not letting his mission be defined by others. Jesus is aware of his purpose. He says, this is why I've come. I know what I'm supposed to do. There's no ambiguity on my end. When we learn his mission, we learn ours as well. And what does he say? The reason why I've come is to preach and to heal and to love on people, to paraphrase what we just said. Because it says, let's go on to the neighboring villages so I may preach there too. This is why I have come. He went into all Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons. That was his mission. And so that's his mission, therefore it's our mission. And you might be sitting there, well, that's a big leap. Are we supposed to be doing the same things? Yes. John 20, verse 21. As the Father has sent me, I also send you. In other words, the same mission I was given by the Father, I am now passing on to you. The preaching of the gospel is our mission. Now, the preaching of the gospel can appear in many different formats. It's not always preaching from the pulpit, but preaching of the gospel is also Sunday school. Preaching of the gospel is also any of your small groups that's going on, whether it be youth, school of ministry. Certainly this As You Go campaign, going out there, that's our mission. And so if you're sitting there looking at that going, I don't want anything to do with that, inviting people to listen to Jesus, about the gospel of Jesus, if that's not your mission here as a church, then what is? Really? Tell me. Is it to have potlucks? Is it just to sit around and hymn and haw with each other in Sunday school? That's our mission, is to get the gospel of Jesus Christ out there. And again, it's not always from the pulpit. Sometimes it's in the classroom. It's not always from the classroom. Sometimes it's in children's ministry. It's not always in children's ministry. Sometimes it's in these As You Go outreach campaigns, a variety of ways. But the thing we always have to ask ourselves is that when we construct and create these ministries, are they really working towards the accomplishment of our mission? And if not, why are we wasting our time, our energy, our resources, our money towards things that don't matter, that don't contribute? Jesus informs Peter that his mission is to preach the kingdom of God. That's ours. That's our mission, to make sure the gospel of Christ is known. His prayer life revolved around his mission. His focus was on this mission. Jesus has taken back territory that was under demonic rule. You understand that, right? When it uses the expression, Jesus drove out demons, it's borrowing language from the Old Testament when the Israelis were commanded to drive out the inhabitants of the land so that they could take the land. Jesus is doing that. And he's asking us, commanding us to partner with him in the driving out of darkness in our community. And we do that by means of preaching, teaching, loving, healing. We are to do all those things to minister to people and take care of both their spiritual and physical needs. This mission has not changed. First Baptist Church is to be preaching Christ to our community so that God's kingdom forces the enemy away. Any activity or project inside the church that does not help us accomplish this mission should be abandoned. This is not rude. This is not hateful. This is simply just looking at the criteria, the standard by which mighty Jesus gave us, and sitting there and says, this does not collide with the mission that Jesus gave us. But it's about being focused and not being distracted. It kind of reminds me of a young boy, and y'all can probably relate to this, who was left home alone, and his parents left him a list of things to do. Now, he looked at the list and said, okay, I want to get to work on this. And he spends all the day working, spending all the day doing things that he believes needs to be done. And then finally, at the end of the workday, both of his parents come home and said, all right, boy, did you finish everything that was put on your list? And he said, well, I want you to look at all the things that I did. And he begins to go through the house and shows the parents all the other things that he did. But here's the thing that they noticed. Every time they looked at some work that he had been doing, every work that he completed, they said, okay, well, what about those things that I commanded you to do? And he noticed when he looked at the list and cross-referenced it to all the activity that he had done, he had indeed been very active, been doing a lot of work, but oddly enough, all that he accomplished was none of the things that was on the list. That describes your typical American local church. That there's a lot of activity, the calendar is filled up, the budget is designated towards things, but all the while, Jesus is like, I didn't ask you to do any of this. All that you're doing does not contribute to the mission that I gave you. Why are you doing this? Now, I bring this sermon up because, well, it's the next passage of Mark, but also our new year, August, is fast approaching. You don't think it is, but it will be. You know, this new year is halfway over, right? 2024 is halfway over. And usually about this time of year is when we start game planning, strategizing, and thinking about what we can do differently when August is done and we enter into our new year in September. I want us these next few months to really pray about what we have been doing and what we should be doing. And using the mission of Jesus Christ as the standard to determine what stays and what goes, and to have the boldness and the wisdom to follow through and to execute. Can you do that? See, what it's going to require, though, is a lot of prayer. A lot of prayer. It's going to require you to really focus on the will of God. It's going to require you to familiarize yourself with what the mission of God is. I invite you to do that with me over these next few months, so that when we go into this next calendar year, whatever you want to call it, we do it with a clear vision on what we're supposed to be about and how we're going to accomplish this mission here in Meade County. So our lovely ladies are going to help us in song. If Rob's helping, I apologize. Saying lovely ladies. That's right. I want you to spend time in prayer over the message I just communicated to you. I challenge you as to how you can specifically pray this morning. Praying over your own prayer life, praying over about being focused, and praying about the mission and how we can be better involved in it. But simply respond to God's word this morning. Ms. Roxanne?
Would you stand, please?